At the family dinner, Dad said, "I'm proud of all my children. Except the loser sitting at this table." Everyone laughed. I stood up, placed an envelope on the table, and said, "For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day." Then I walked out. He opened it and couldn't stop screaming for 10 minutes straight. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope and why it made a billionaire scream like a child, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I love seeing how far this community reaches. The sound that left Richard's throat wasn't a word. It was the primal, terrified noise of a man watching his entire life disintegrate in a single second. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings of Sterling Manor, silencing the room instantly. The laughter died. The crystal glasses stopped clinking. 50 heads turned toward the head of the table. But I didn't turn back. I kept walking. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a steady, rhythmic metronome counting down the end of his empire. Behind me, I heard a chair crash backward. I heard Preston shouting something incoherent, probably a threat he didn't have the leverage to enforce. I heard Sylvia's high-pitched demand for an explanation, but those were just background noises now, static on a frequency I had finally tuned out. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the cool Newport air. The valet looked at me, confused to see a guest leaving before the main course was served. I didn't wait for him to fetch my car. I walked straight to my beat-up Volvo. The one Richard liked to joke, lowered the property value every time I parked it. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I checked the rearview mirror as I pulled away. No one followed me. They were too busy drowning in the chaos I had left behind. As the estate disappeared into the distance, the adrenaline began to settle into a cold, hard clarity. I know what people ask. I know what you're thinking right now. Why did I wait 29 years? If he was a monster, if he stole everything, why did I sit at his table, eat his food, and let him call me a loser for 3 decades? It's called the invisible chain. When you grow up in a cage, you don't realize you're a prisoner. You just think the world is small. Richard didn't use physical bars. He used words. He built a prison out of "you're not enough and be grateful." He trained me to be quiet, to be invisible, to be the mouse in the corner of his great literary house. He groomed me to believe that my silence was the price of my survival. He needed me to feel small so he could feel giant. He needed me to believe the door was locked from the outside. But 2 months ago, I learned the truth. The door wasn't locked. It never was. I just had to stand up and turn the handle. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a strategy. It was a survival tactic I used until I forged a weapon sharp enough to cut the chain. And tonight, I didn't just cut it. I melted it down and poured it down his throat. I drove for 40 minutes until I reached the one place where I actually belonged. The Sterling Archives. It was a climate-controlled fortress of steel and concrete on the edge of the city, housing millions of dollars in rare manuscripts. To Richard, it was just a storage unit. To me, it was the armory. I swiped my keycard. The heavy door hissed open. I stepped into the cool, dry air that smelled of old paper and history. I wasn't the daughter of a CEO anymore. I wasn't the loser at the kids' table. I was the executioner, and I had work to do. Let me take you back to where the clock really started ticking. 2 months ago, I was here, in this exact room, doing what I always did, fixing the things Richard had forgotten. I was restoring a 19th century roll-top desk that had been gathering dust in storage for 20 years. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was my mother's, Eleanor's desk, the place where she supposedly wrote nothing of value. According to Richard, I was polishing the mahogany when my finger caught on a groove inside the drawer. It wasn't a scratch. It was a seam. I pressed it. There was a sharp click, and a false bottom popped open. Inside, the air smelled like lavender and secrets. There were no jewels or cash, just a leather-bound notebook in a sealed manila envelope. I opened the notebook first. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized the handwriting immediately, the looping, elegant script of my mother. I turned to the title page, The Titan's Fall, a novel by Eleanor Sterling, dated November 12th, 1985. I froze. The Titan's Fall was the book that launched Richard's career. It was the bestseller that built this entire building, the foundation of the Sterling Empire. He claimed he wrote it in a burst of genius in 1987. But here it was, in my hands, written 2 full years earlier, word for word, in my mother's hand. He didn't write it. He transcribed it. He stole her mind. He stole her voice. He built a $1 billion reputation on the genius of a woman he drove to an early grave. My hands were trembling, but I forced them to open the second envelope. It contained a single sheet of paper from a lab in Boston, dated 29 years ago. A paternity test. Probability of paternity, 0%. Attached to it was a letter. Unfinished. Addressed to me. My dearest Mallory. It read, Richard isn't your father. He destroyed your father. Julian Thorne was a good man. A brilliant writer. And Richard's greatest rival. When Richard couldn't beat him, he ruined him with lawsuits. He blackmailed me into marriage to get the rights to my work. He adopted you to keep me quiet. I am a prisoner in a house built on my own stolen words. The room spun. Suddenly, 30 years of cruelty made perfect sense. Richard didn't hate me because I was quiet. He didn't hate me because I was an archivist. He hated me because every time he looked at me, he saw the man he destroyed. He saw the woman he robbed. I wasn't just his stepdaughter. I was the evidence. I was the living, breathing proof of the fraud at the center of his soul. I didn't cry for my mother then. I didn't mourn the father I never knew. I felt something else entirely. It was a cold, metallic click in my brain. The same sound the desk made when the secret opened. He thought he had buried the truth, but he made a fatal mistake. He hired the daughter of his victim to guard the bodies. I closed the notebook. I put the papers back in the envelope. I wasn't going to burn them. I wasn't going to hide them. I was going to digitize them. For the next 8 weeks, I didn't sleep. I didn't storm into Richard's office screaming accusations. I didn't even hire a lawyer, not yet. Emotions are volatile variables. I needed constants. I needed data. I treated my revenge exactly like a restoration project. I was methodical. I was quiet. And I was ruthless. I spent my nights in the archives, turning the high-security facility into my own forensic lab. I took high-resolution scans of every page of my mother's notebook. I analyzed the ink degradation to prove the date was authentic. I uploaded the files to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers, one in Zurich, one in Singapore, and one on a hard drive I buried in my mother's flower bed. But the notebook wasn't enough. I needed the smoking gun. I dug into the corporate filings from 1987. Richard was sloppy. He always was. He assumed no one would ever look back that far. I found the original copyright transfer forms for the Titan's Fall. There it was, in black and white, a signature that was supposed to be my mother's. I pulled up a sample of her real handwriting from a birthday card she gave me when I was 5. I overlaid them on the monitor. They didn't match. The loop on the L was wrong. The slant was too aggressive. It was a forgery. And it was a bad one. Richard hadn't just stolen the book. He had forged a dead woman's signature to transfer the intellectual property rights to Sterling Media. That wasn't just plagiarism. That was federal fraud, while I was building the gallows. Richard and his family were busy tightening the noose around their own necks. They were preparing for the biggest event in the company's history, the initial public offering, the IPO. They were taking Sterling Media public, valuing the company at $1.2 billion. The entire valuation hinged on the legacy catalog, the intellectual property of the early bestsellers. The very books Richard had stolen. They were so arrogant. They were so drunk on their own reflection that they didn't even notice the archivist in the corner. Preston walked into my office 3 times that month, bragging about the $15 million bonus he was going to get when the stock launched. He didn't even look at what was on my screen. Sylvia called me twice. Not to check on me, but to make sure I had cataloged the wine list for the gala correctly. And Richard? Richard came down to the archives 1 week before the dinner. He needed me to sign a release form for a subsidiary trust. My mother had left me a tiny, forgotten asset. Just sign it. Mallory, he said, not even looking me in the eye. It's a formality. Try not to make a mess of it. I signed it. I handed it back. I smiled. Of course. Richard, I said, I wouldn't want to ruin your big moment. He walked away, confident that I was just the quiet, useless girl he had successfully erased. He had no idea that he had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle. He thought he was building a legacy. He didn't realize he was building the stage for his own execution. I didn't go back to my apartment. It wasn't safe. I stayed in the archives, locked behind 6 inches of reinforced steel. My phone sat on the metal desk, vibrating violently against the surface. It looked like an angry insect trying to escape a jar. The first wave of attacks wasn't legal. It was personal. Preston sent 14 texts in 3 minutes. You psycho. The first one read, Dad is hyperventilating. We're calling the police. The last one was more desperate. You just cost me $15 million. You bitch. Then came the voicemail from Sylvia. I played it on speaker, letting her shrill voice fill the silent vault. Mallory, You ungrateful little brat. We gave you a job when no one else would look at you. We put clothes on your back. You fix this. Right now. Or you are fired. Do you hear me? You are destitute. I deleted the message. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a tantrum. They thought they could bully me back into submission because that's what had worked for 20 years. They didn't realize that I wasn't an employee anymore. I was the whistleblower. Then came Richard's move. It was smarter. It was colder. At 3 a.m. A Google alert pinged on my laptop. A press release from Sterling Media. Issued to the Associated Press, Reuters, and Bloomberg. Statement regarding the disruption at the Sterling Manor dinner. The Sterling family is deeply concerned for the mental well-being of our daughter, Mallory. She has been struggling with significant psychiatric challenges following the loss of her mother. We ask for privacy as we help her seek the treatment she desperately needs during this breakdown. I stared at the screen. It was brilliant. In 3 sentences, he had delegitimized everything I was about to say. If I released the documents now, I wasn't a whistleblower exposing fraud. I was a crazy daughter, having a manic episode. He was spinning the narrative. He was building a padded room around me before I could even open my mouth. He thought he had checkmated me. But Richard had a blind spot. He assumed I was playing the media game that I would run to Twitter or TMZ. He assumed I wanted attention. I didn't want attention. I wanted an audit. I opened a secure browser window. I wasn't sending my evidence to a gossip columnist. For the last 6 months, I had been anonymously feeding breadcrumbs to Elias Thorne, a senior investigative journalist at the New York Times who specialized in white-collar crime. He knew something was rotting at Sterling Media, but he couldn't prove it. I typed a single subject line. The smoking gun. I attached the kill file. The high-resolution scans of the 1985 notebook. The forensic handwriting analysis report. The forged copyright transfer forms. The DNA test proving Richard's paternity fraud. And then I added the final piece of the puzzle, the one Richard didn't know I had. I attached the internal memo Preston had sent to the board last week, confirming that the initial public offering valuation was based 90% on the legacy catalog. By forging those copyrights, Richard hadn't just stolen from my mother. He had defrauded future shareholders of $1.2 billion. He had committed securities fraud. I hit send. The file vanished from my outbox. It was done. There was no taking it back. I wasn't just fighting a family feud anymore. I had just handed a loaded gun to the Department of Justice. My phone buzzed again. Another threat from Richard. I will ruin you, it said. I turned the phone off. He couldn't ruin me. I was already a ghost. And in about 4 hours, when the sun came up over the Golden Gala, he was going to find out exactly what happens when you try to bury the truth. It doesn't stay dead. It grows teeth. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Manor was designed to intimidate. Gold leaf ceilings, velvet drapes, and 500 of the wealthiest investors in the world sitting in silence, waiting to buy a piece of the lie. At the center of it all stood Richard. He was on the raised stage, bathed in the white-hot light of the spotlights. He looked magnificent. The perfect patriarch. The genius author. He was speaking into the microphone, his voice booming through the surround sound system. Broadcast lived to millions of viewers on CNBC and YouTube. Sterling Media isn't just a company, he said, spreading his arms wide. It is a legacy built on the bedrock of original thought. It is built on truth. I was standing 40 feet above him. In the projection booth, the lighting technician, a kid named Dave who I'd helped with paperwork last Christmas, looked at me with wide eyes. I didn't say a word. I just held up my senior archivist badge and pointed to the door. He didn't argue. He knew the hierarchy. He left. I locked the door. I sat down at the control console, below me. Richard was winding up for the pitch. When I wrote The Titans Fall 30 years ago, I poured my soul onto the page. I typed in the master override code, billionaire 1985, the massive LED screen behind Richard, which was displaying a graph of projected profits. Flickered once. Then it went black. The room gasped. Richard turned around, confused. His perfect smile faltering for a fraction of a second. A technical glitch. He chuckled into the mic. Live television, right? Then the screen came back to life. But it wasn't showing profits. It was showing a split-screen image. On the left, the first page of the published book, The Titans Fall. On the right, high-resolution handwriting. My mother's handwriting, dated November 12th, 1985. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the lungs of 500 people. Richard froze. He stared at the date. He stared at the words he had stolen. I hit the next key. The screen changed. Now it was the forensic handwriting analysis report from the FBI-accredited lab. The words forged signature appeared in red block letters over the copyright transfer forms. Then, the final slide. The DNA test. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Richard turned back to the crowd. And in that moment, I saw it happen. I saw the disintegration. There is a theory about men like Richard. We think their power is intrinsic, like bone or muscle. We think they are giants. But they aren't. Their power is rented. It is a costume stitched together from the admiration of others and the lies they tell themselves. They are balloons filled with hot air, expanding until they blot out the sun. But when you prick the balloon, it doesn't slowly deflate. It pops. Richard didn't try to explain. He didn't try to charm. The Titan vanished, replaced instantly by a terrified Dia. Cornered animal. "Cut it!" he screamed, his voice cracking, the microphone amplifying his panic into a distorted shriek. "Cut the feed! Turn it off! She's lying! She's crazy!" He was clawing at the air, pointing at the booth, his face purple with rage. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was just a thief in an expensive suit who had realized the police were at the door. The investors were standing up. The journalists were flashing their cameras, capturing the meltdown in high definition. The live stream comments on the side monitors were scrolling so fast they were a blur of shock and emojis. I leaned into the microphone in the booth, overriding the stage audio. My voice filled the ballroom. Calm. Cold. And absolute. "You didn't write it, Richard," I said. "And you didn't make me. You stole us both." Richard scrambled off the stage, tripping over the microphone cable. He regained his balance and lunged toward the stairs leading to the projection booth. He wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. He was looking at me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with a violence I had seen hidden behind his smile for 30 years. "I will kill you," he screamed, abandoning all pretense of the sophisticated author. "You ungrateful little..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't make it to the stairs. The double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. It wasn't hotel security. It wasn't the local police. It was a squad of 6 men and women in navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They moved with the terrifying, coordinated efficiency of a machine designed to crush insects. They swarmed the stage before Richard could take another step. The lead agent stepped into the spotlight, blocking Richard's path to me. "Richard Sterling," the agent said, his voice carrying over the stunned silence of the room. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and the falsification of corporate assets." Richard froze. He looked at the agent, then back at the crowd of investors. "This is a mistake," he stammered, breathless. "This is a family squabble. My daughter is mentally ill. You can't. Hands behind your back." The agent barked. They didn't wait for him to comply. 2 agents grabbed his arms and spun him around. The click-click of the handcuffs echoed through the room, louder than any speech Richard had ever given. It was the sound of a $1 billion valuation hitting zero. Preston, who had been standing in the front row, tried to slowly back away toward the side exit. He looked like a ghost. He knew his name was on the memos. He knew he had signed off on the fraudulent valuation. 2 more agents intercepted him before he reached the carpet's edge. They didn't cuff him gently. They slammed him against the wall. "Preston Sterling, you are being detained as a co-conspirator," an agent stated. The room erupted, not with applause, but with the digital panic of 500 people losing money at the same time. Phones were lighting up everywhere. The investors weren't looking at Richard anymore. They were looking at the stock market tickers on their screens. I watched from the booth as the graph on someone's iPad in the front row turned a violent red. The IPO had been halted. The stock had plummeted before trading even fully opened. The Sterling Empire wasn't just bankrupt. It was radioactive. Richard was being frog-marched off the stage, his head bowed, the cameras flashing in his face like lightning. He looked up at the booth one last time. He looked at me. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just watched. He thought he was untouchable because he controlled the narrative. He thought he could write his own ending. But he forgot the first rule of storytelling. If you build your plot on a lie, the climax will always be a tragedy. The agents pushed him through the doors. The heavy wood slammed shut, and just like that, the Titan was gone. 6 months later, the name Sterling had been scrubbed from the building. The bronze letters were melted down, the brand dismantled and sold off in pieces to pay the SEC fines. Richard pleaded guilty to avoid a 20-year sentence. He got 8 years in minimum security. But at 62, 8 years is a lifetime. I didn't visit him. I didn't write. The silence between us is finally permanent. I did go back to the manor one last time. Though, not to live there, the bank seized it, but to collect the one thing that mattered. I took the desk. I took the books. And I took my mother's name. I'm not Mallory Sterling anymore. I changed my legal name to Mallory Thorne, honoring the father I never got to meet, and the mother whose genius started it all. I used the whistleblower reward, a percentage of the recovered funds, to start something new. Eleanor Press. We don't publish blockbusters. We publish lost voices. We find the writers who have been silenced. The manuscripts hidden in drawers. The stories that were stolen or erased. And we give them back to the world. Yesterday, I drove out to the small cemetery on the coast where my mother is buried. It was a crisp, bright morning. The kind of day she would have loved. I knelt in the grass and placed a book on her headstone. It was a new edition of The Titan's Fall. The cover was simple and elegant. And right there, in gold letters, was the only correction that ever mattered. Written by Eleanor Thorne. I fixed it. Mom, I whispered. It's yours again. I stood up and looked out at the ocean. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a rough draft. I didn't feel like a footnote in someone else's biography. I took out my phone. I scrolled to the contact labeled Dad. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I just pressed delete. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove away into the rest of my life. If you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, or if you're still building the courage to do it, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to know they aren't alone. You are the author of your own life now.